For this video, we're going to build out our self-hosted instance, in this case using DigitalOcean. So these are going to be our requirements, and we're going to be using these prerequisites to first build out what we need before we get into the actual items that we'll be moving on to within PuTTY. So starting off, these are the resources we'll need, and I'm going to switch over to our DigitalOcean instance so that way we can get started. So now we are within DigitalOcean, so let's create that droplet and those resources. So pulling this guide back over, we're going to be building out this first section of our server, allocating the right memory, CPU, and choosing the proper Ubuntu version. So we're going to hit create, droplets. Now I'm going to be selecting New York as that is the closest data center. We're going to be using Ubuntu, selecting the correct item or the one that matches our current guide, in this case 2204. Going down, we have our CPU. We can go down and choose our CPU options. In this case, we're going to keep that default, but we're going to switch to this other version. So this is what we recommend as the minimum requirements of building out your self-hosted instance. You can, of course, scale this up as you need, but again, minimum requirements is at least 4 gigabytes of memory. Going down, we have our authentication method. In this case, we also recommend an SSH key as it does have a little bit more protection with it. A password, of course, is still usable if you choose to go that route. If you want to know how to get your SSH key, we do also have a guide attached to that. Scrolling down now, though, we have these items, and we can see that we are all finished here, but we're going to name this host. In this case, we'll call this our Hoodoo internal. And then we will create this droplet and then use those resources. So after that's been built out, it'll take a minute afterwards, but here we have our droplet. So we have our IP address. So we're actually going to switch over to PuTTY. So I'm going to drop the screen down. And here is our PuTTY configuration. I'm going to add a host name. And we have, in this case, a Hoodoo already. So let's make a new one. We're going to call this our Hoodoo install. And then we're going to start adding our SSH. So in this case, since we added an SSH info, we're going to go to our SSH authentication. We're going to drop this down again and upload those credentials. So in this case, I have my private key saved. So I'm going to quick browse my locations and add that to this section. So we quick have our private key associated with where we saved it. Now we're also going to go up to our data section and we're going to use our auto login name. So in this case, if you set up an SSH key, you might have had a password or a code associated with it. So in this case, we're going to start by assuming that we have our root login. And then after our credentials are uploaded, we should be all set. We'll go back up to our session and we can save this. So that way we can get back to this whenever we need, but we're going to open. Now, after a moment, it's going to look for our key. In this case, we're just going to hit accept. So now I got to type in my password. Once I've properly added in that key, we have our info and we're getting started into our instance. Now we have the resources allocated for our server. So let's build out and connect to our next session, which is going to be the A record that we're pointing to. So we're going to go over to our networking tab. Then within our domains, we currently have our example in here. If you're ready to add your domain, you can just paste it in here and add domain. So we're going to click into this. And now we're going to create that A record. So in this case, if we want a host name, we can call this docs, for example, and then we're going to point this to the next session, which in this case is going to be that server that we just built. We're going to create this record. And now we have our type A instance or our site that we're going to be pointing our public IP to. Next is going to be building out that firewall. So pulling back up our directions, we can see that we need ports 443 and 80 open externally. In order to do that, we're going to go to our firewall section. This is still within your networks. We have our domain, now our firewall. We're going to create a new firewall and we're going to adjust this initial SSH. So this IP address is going to be our public IP address, so we can get this at IP chicken. I'm going to quick pull mine over and then bring it into this instance real quick. So I just use IP chicken. I have my IP address that I need. So we're going to replace these and instead paste in that info. Here we need to add it as an address, so that way we make sure it saves. Now we need to open up the 80 and 440. So we're going to select a new rule, starting with HTTP, opening our 80, and now we have our HTTPS. That's going to be our 443. So we're going to save this. I'm going to have this as hoodoo-internal. Let's call it install. So that way we can keep our naming standard consistent. Now we're going to add our droplet to that. In this case, we're going to add it here. And then we have our hoodoo droplet that we want to add, in this case test, add droplet. And now this will also be applied to our firewall so that way we can get everything going. So here we have those prerequisites, the server built, A record, and ports 443 and 80 open. For sake of this self-hosted guide, however, we will be skipping over the SMTP server. And now let's move on to that next section, which is going to be building out the rest of our instance. Let's take a look at that next section since we have our prereqs done. Real quick, it is important to make sure that you have tested your 443 and 80 ports are open and accessible. If you want to double check, you can use your URL with this tool that I'll open up right here. It is included. You can scan your IP or host name here. And please, again, make sure that you have 443 and 80 open, or else you won't be able to continue through the guide. Let's install Docker CE. I'm going to open up this link. We have our installed Docker engine, selecting Ubuntu because that's our current version. If you have an older version and you want to have a clean swipe, you can have this command line run in your box, but in this case, we have everything updated and where it's at. So instead, we're going to install the repository. We're going to go through steps 1 through 3. So first copying this item over. Now this might take a moment, but once you're done with this, we can move on to the next package to install. Here we have our GPG key. And then we have our final setup repository. So we're going to copy that in. With that all set, let's get the auto update to update our instance to the most recent install. So we're copying that in. Again, copying in that step 1. Then finally, we're going to install the latest version. You are able to choose whichever versions by going to the specific tab, but in this case, we want to have the most recently updated Docker install. So we have that Docker Compose plugin. We're going to add that in. We want to install. We'll continue with a yes. Now we're going to skip ahead a bit so that way you don't have to watch this install. So with that installed, now if we want to double check to make sure that everything is running successfully, we do have this step below that we can copy in, running the hello world. And as we enter this in, we are pulling in the information. Now this list will let you know that you have everything installed properly. Now we're going to create our directory, just copying this word for word. We can bring this into our section. And now we're going to move into that directory using CD rather than typing everything out. This is formatted for you to copy and paste. Now we have to install our Docker Compose YAML. So we have to also edit this. So we'll use VI. You can use whichever editing method, but in this case, I'm just going to be using VI. So we have Docker Compose .yaml. We have that open, we'll hit I to insert, and here is the content that we'll be adding. So we're going to open this up. And we're going to copy everything that comes up in this folder. So copying that, pasting it in here, we have our info. We're going to hit escape, : and then we're going to do our Q. If we want to double check that we have everything in there, we can do a ls and then a -la. And here we can see the items currently installed. Next is going to be the .env in the directory. So we're going to open up for the generator, clicking on that tab, and I'll expand this in full view. So here is our subdomain that we set for our A record. In this case, this was ours, and I'll add our next one, which was our hoodoodemo.com. So now below that, we get to choose our file storage. In this case, we're going to use local storage for the example, but if you have an S3, this will be the section to set it up for that storage. Again, going back to our local though, as we go down, this is our SMTP information. You can add your SMTP here if you have that all set and ready for your instance, or you can do it within your Hoodoo instance where it will override the information you add in this section for that SMTP. The incredibly important part for this section though is our secret key. So we're going to copy this information and make sure that you keep it in a very secure location. If this is lost, it will possibly keep you out of your instance, so keep it secure and accessible. Now we're going to add our .env, so we're going to do vi again, .env, insert, and then we're going to copy and paste that info. Once we're all done, we'll hit escape, :WQ, and if we want to check this directory, just so you know, the env will be hidden initially. If you want to see it, you'll have to do the -la, and there we can see our .env. With that set, we're now going to go into this part and have our sudo docker up. And this will begin to start our Hoodoo instance. So we're going to have this install for a moment. Now this can vary between a couple minutes, so I'm going to skip ahead so you don't have to watch all of this install. We are ready to test our instance. So we're going to input our link using that full A direction, and we're going to show you what that looks like with everything set up. If you want to check on the install for everything that we've just run, we can run a docker and then going to be s. And here we can see all the items we have installed and make sure that your Let's Encrypt is all put together, which we do see Let's Encrypt here. So we know that that is working. But the true test is going to be adding in our domain that we created. Now that we've completed that part, we're going to place our link at the top of our screen. And we have our swag instance. This is letting us know that all of our steps before have been successful again. And if we want to click this up here, we can also check to make sure that we do have Let's Encrypt verified. So we're going to take this next step to take this instance back down and move forward onto the next steps. So now we're back at our guide. I'm going to go over to the next step, which is going to be the sudo docker compose down. I'm going to bring that over here, right click, pasting that. And we're going to be stopping those functions so that way we can move on and get on with the next steps. Okay, now that we've skipped forward ahead a bit, we have that back down. So let's do cd, and then we're going to right click. So that way we can get to this next section, which is going to be navigate to this folder level. So we have that, make sure no extra characters, and we are back here. If we just want to ls, we can double check that we have everything that we need within this current level. So we do have our default conf and then our sample. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove that default conf. And then we're actually going to create another one with that default conf again, so that we can go into that editor. We're going to replace that information with that next step. We're replacing all of the content. I'm actually going to download, open this up, and then copy and paste that from the notepad into this instance. I'm going to hit I, so that way we can edit and bring that information in. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to control click, open that in the next menu, and then highlight everything that we need, which is going to be the entire page. We'll copy that over, right click, and then we're going to escape and WQ. So that should bring in all of the new information that we need. We've added those changes. Now we're going to highlight and go back to that Hoodoo 2 folder. So we're going to copy that, paste it again and run it. And then now we're going to bring our system back up. So I'm going to copy this next section and get everything back up and started once again. After starting up our instance and typing in our site, you might notice that you get a 502 bad gateway. Just give it a couple minutes while everything is loading in the background. And after we refresh for a couple minutes, we now have our sign up and create account with Hoodoo. And that means that you're ready for your key. I'm going to hit the create account. This is everything that you're going to fill out. The first user that you add here will be your starting super admin level. But once you have it at this level, you're at this page and you can add in this information. You're ready for your key and to begin using Hoodoo. Thank you so much. And if you have any other questions, please feel to reach out to us. We're always happy to talk or answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.